Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Musgrove, and today joined by Newcastle United editor Aaron Stokes. All being well, this will be our regular Monday show as we look back on the weekend. Unfortunately for this episode, the debut episode, Newcastle were defeated 5-1 by Spurs at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Fair to say, Aaron, for your first game as Newcastle United editor, you would have wished for not just a better result, but a better performance as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I came in at the wrong time, joined the team and we had 2 weeks of international break. I was just waiting and waiting, counting down the days for a game finally, and then it came along and it really did disappoint. So, yeah, I think things can only get better from here, can't they?
First off, Newcastle, they were all right. Obviously, took the lead through Fabian Schär, but they looked organised and disciplined. And then the second half was very Jekyll and Hyde. It was an awful second half performance. One of the worst performances we've seen, I think, under Eddie Howe. Many people pointing back that Leicester City defeat in early December as a comparison, and obviously they were thumped down there at the King Power. What did you make of the contrasting performances in both halves against Spurs?
Yeah, look, I mean, the game started, it wasn't the best. The first 10, 15 minutes didn't seem like Newcastle, had any intention of getting the ball. I think the possession was something like 82% for Spurs in the first 15 minutes. Newcastle obviously grew into the game after that. I thought from the 15th minute onward at half time, it was much improved. It was much better. They were, looking to get forward. Obviously Shaw's scored, maybe a bit fortunate with a goal with Lloris, just getting a hand to it. But the contrast, it was just like watching two different teams. It's very, very rare that you see that under Eddie Howe that they do collapse. Obviously, you touched on Leicester there, which was sort of a similar, setup in the game. So, look, I think it's a bit of a reality check. It's a bit of a wake up call. They've sort of pulled clear of the relegation zone, and everyone's already thinking of next season. But I think until they're mathematically safe, it needs to sort of just be feet on the ground still. So, yeah, look, it was really disappointing, and I think. Howe touched on it in his press conference after that. He was even surprised at how sort of quickly they collapsed and fell away. So, yeah, really, really sort of a reminder that the season's not done yet.
No, I think Eddie Howe has been really keen to make sure that not just the players but the fans understand that. And we'll listen now to what Eddie Howe had to say after the game. This is a clip from his press conference.
Yeah, I think first half I thought we did very well. I think maybe a slightly nervous opening to the game. I thought 10 minutes we were maybe a bit too deep. But then I thought we started to get to grips with things and produced a very good performance up until the moment when Fabian scored. Really, I thought we'd frustrated them. We'd controlled the areas that they'd hurt us with the ball, and hugely disappointed to go in at 1-1 because. Bar a few nervy moments, as I say at the start, I thought we'd controlled them.
Is it the nature of the goals that probably might disappoint you the most, how you conceded them in the second half?
Yeah, I think the key goal is the second goal. I think the manner of it, from our perspective, was really disappointing, especially so close to half time, and we needed to feel our way into the second half. We didn't allow ourselves to do that, and I think then we chased the game it depends which way you look at it, in a very aggressive way, and probably played in a way that we shouldn't have done. We became very expansive. We took risks with the ball, and too early in the game to do that. And then we got punished by a top level team. Some of the goals they scored on transitions were very good from our perspective. Obviously, not so good. But I think it was with the ambition to try and get back into the match, and I thought we didn't manage that part of the game very well at all.
So there you have the words of Eddie Howe. Clearly frustrated. He's honest in his assessment. What did you make of his comments?
Yeah, I think he got it spot on. To be fair, I think as we touched on before, the first 10 minutes weren't good enough, and Howe recognised that. They did grow in the game. They did have a foothold in it, and like you say, when they got that goal, right before half time, I thought, perfect time to get it, and maybe that just set the scene for the second half. Conceding so early, Spurs, got themselves back in the game so early, and I think when you concede 2 goals in the first 6 minutes of the second half, it's always going to be difficult. But I think Howe could have came out and try to justify it, and he didn't really. He knows that the players weren't good enough. He knows that defensively it was all over the place, and I think he probably knows himself that he got it wrong. Last night I wrote that it was a rare sort of off day for him tactically. He hasn't really had too many bad days, especially the last couple of months. But I just thought tactically, they were all over the place. It looked like there just wasn't a concrete plan, and it was just sort of a bit of a free fall, especially when the sort of third and fourth goal went in.
You wrote that 5 at the back works. You looked at what happened to Chelsea and how Newcastle nearly got a result there. Do you mean in that instance that 5 at the back works against the bigger teams, the teams with this abundance of talent, or are you advocating 5 at the back as the way forward for against every team?
No, I think against the bigger teams, I think how systems proved that it worked. I mean, they were seconds away from getting a point at Chelsea using that technique. Where they aren't sitting deep and they are putting a bit of pressure on. You've got the wing backs that can sort of do the attacking work as well. So I was surprised yesterday when the team sheet came out and he opted for 4. Especially when Spurs have got that front 3 of Kulusevski, Son, and Kane, and we know Kane likes to drop deep. So you would have had another sort of centre back in the 5 to go and sort of follow him. So I was just surprised that he changed it like that. I thought the team selection itself was actually quite good when the team came out. I think obviously we know Bruno didn't start because of his travelling, but I think on the face of it, it was a strong team. But I couldn't really understand the swapping from the 5 to the 4 when, as you say, it worked really well against Chelsea. So I think maybe for Liverpool and City before the end of the season, it's probably a system to bring back in against those bigger teams.
Let's talk about some of the changes during the game. We had John Shelby kind of drop back into as the commentator said, a Beckenbauer role, and then we had Jamal Lascelles come onto the pitch for Chris Wood and go into kind of a 3-man central defense kind of setup. Interesting to say the least. I have to say, I think if the previous manager had done something similar, he would have been highly criticised by a lot of people, especially the fan base on social media. What did you make of the changes?
Yeah, I like I say when I wrote about this last night, I thought it was a bit scattergun. I thought it was a bit all over the place. Now, look, it's always tricky when you've had a team talk at half time, you told the lads what you want from them, and then 6 minutes later you're 3-1 down. You're always sort of chasing the game at that point. And obviously when the third goal went and he brought Bruno on, which fans are never going to be disappointed with. He brought Murphy on to try and sort of change it and obviously change the formation. Lascelles coming on, look, I think it was damage limitation at that point, but I do get what you mean. I think if that had been Bruce sort of chopping and changing like that, there would have been a lot more stick on social media. But I think, yesterday at one point you had 8 or 9 different players trying to fill into that back 4/back 5 across a 40-minute period, and there was just no sort of rhythm or there was no sort of reasoning behind it. It was just sort of trying to plug the gaps. And look, Spurs were brilliant. Spurs were fantastic. Kane, his passing was just ridiculous. And when you've got Son running at the end of it, it's always going to be dangerous. But I thought Newcastle helped Spurs a lot. And when they were, like you say, changing the back 4 and 5 every 5-10 minutes of the game, and Shelby's dropping in, and Murphy and Fraser, and we're playing wing back. There was just no rhythm, and I think once it was 3-4-1, it was just game over, really.
Yeah, and we'll concentrate on the defence for just a little bit longer. A lot of people talking about Dan Burn. Some saying, look, you don't want to scapegoat, and we're not scapegoating yet, but I think it is important that we do talk about individual performances. Look, he's been brilliant since he arrived from Brighton. Unfortunately for him, I don't think you can get away from the fact he's probably at fault for the goals against Chelsea and Everton. And then yesterday, arguably had the worst game since joining Newcastle United. Again, you've got to put in the context, like I say, since his arrival, he's largely been brilliant. But yesterday against Tottenham, he just looked a little, he didn't have that discipline that we've seen of late. There was a few off the ball things he was doing. And bear in mind, he was on a yellow card. He was very fortunate to maybe even be on the pitch by the end of the game. And it was a case, and not just him, I think other players began to lose their head a little bit. I know I was one of them that kind of applauded Joe Linton for rushing in and shall we say, gently removing a Spurs player from a group. But it's that sort of ill discipline which really didn't help Newcastle. Joe Linton got booked for that, and that meant he couldn't really, lunge in and dive in and challenges and stop Spurs as maybe he would have done had he not been cautioned. What did you first of all make of Dan Burns' performance? And then do you agree there was maybe a lack of discipline throughout the side, especially, as we got further into the second half?
Yeah, 100%. I think, look, when it comes to Dan Burn, you can't deny that he has been fantastic since he came in. A good addition, for not a lot of money. Brighton were obviously very sad to lose him, and he's shown why. He is a talent. I mean, I know during the international break there was people questioning, should Southgate be considering him for the World Cup? He was probably at fault for the Chelsea goal. He dived in against Everton, and yesterday for the 5th goal, he just lets Lucas Moura sort of drift past him as if he's not even there. So there is flaws in his game, and I think you can see why, the ownership and how we're looking so hard to find like a top quality centre back in January. The likes of Sven Botman and Diego Carlos. Dan Burn isn't at that level. And he's another one where, will we get a couple of years out of him, and will he be moved on for, sort of a bigger name come the time? Possibly. But look, he has hardly put a foot wrong since he came in. He has made a couple of mistakes, but on the whole, I think Newcastle fans have been impressed with him. He's a local lad. He's clearly up for the fight, and I think should Newcastle get dragged back into it, God forbid, he's a player that you would want sort of fighting for the team at the heart of the defence. But yeah, it was another bad day from yesterday. But yeah, you've got to hope that that those sort of errors don't sort of creep into his game, more frequently. I think on the whole, discipline, yeah, Burn was just one of many that I think it just sort of, lost their heads towards the end. How sort of had to make that Joe Linton change so early because he got booked in the first half for that push, which, fans were, applauding for. It's the type of passion you want. But he fouled a Spurs player, early on in the second half. And I think that was, he was sort of lucky to not get a yellow card for that as well. So I think Howe didn't really have an option. And I think when you've got players, sort of doing that, then it just makes the challenge even harder, doesn't it? So, yeah, just not a good day at the office, really, for any of the players, I would say.
Do we look at it and say, well, look, that's their 4th away game in a row. They've now got 3 home games coming up. They need that bounce that playing at home can give you. That gives any side, let alone, Newcastle, because of what the crowd at St James Park brings to the club. So do we look at it like that and say, look, it's been a hard few weeks, and we now just look ahead to Friday. Hopefully the crowd can play their part, which I'm sure they will do. They always do. And Newcastle, the players have to channel that and hopefully get back to winning ways.
I think, yeah, look, we've had 3 away games on the bounce, and 2 of them are at clubs that are challenging for the top 4. So it was always going to be difficult. You would have liked to have hoped to at least get some points out of them, whether that was the draw at Chelsea or a draw or a win at Everton. But I think a return to a home game is much needed, and I think given the sort of run of the last couple of weeks in James's Park, they'll be up for it on Friday. They know that they've got that part to play against a Wolves team that are beatable, and it wouldn't be a shock if Newcastle did turn it around on Friday. But I think it was just a shame yesterday, the manner of the performance. Yes, it was away. Yes, it was against Tottenham, who were in good form. But they had that 2-week break in Dubai, and everybody thought, well, get those 2 defeats out your system, have a nice little break away, a bit of bonding, get some, hard training done, and then come back. And the performance yesterday sort of looked like a team that hadn't had a break at all, really. So that's probably a worrying aspect. But yeah, I think, as you say, a home game's much needed. And yeah, Friday, it'll be bouncing Friday night. So you've got to hope that changes things.
I saw a few people on social media saying, well, look, yes, they've lost the last 3. They didn't really deserve to lose against Chelsea. Against Everton, yes, they didn't capitalise on the red card. And when you look at how Everton performed recently, goodness me, you do kind of scratch your heads. And, that's a huge game, isn't it, against Burnley on Wednesday. I'm sure lots of Newcastle United fans will be watching with interest. And then obviously you've got this game where, yes, they did deserve to lose because the second half was awful. But that's probably the worst second half of the last, 10, 11 games, and you've got to look at what went before. Eddie Howe has set the bar so high. The players have shown what they can do when they work together and then put their all into it. So have we just got to be a little bit measured in the reaction to this defeat, or is it right that we look a little bit further into it and say, well, actually, yeah, they were on a good run, but they have lost the last 3 on the bounce, and Spurs was for some particularly alarming?
I think Howe in some ways has been sort of a victim of his own success because, he's came in, he's completely changed this team. He's made them look a lot more steady and, compact and disciplined. So, of course, when all of a sudden they revert back to type that, we saw at the start of the season, Howe sort of thinks, well, Howe sort of gets the blame as, and, has he really fixed them? So, the nature of the defeat yesterday, I think, has led to why, there's been so much, surprise. I think because of the collapse, that's probably why there's been so much talk of, it's a reality check, blah, blah, blah. But I think if we do have to, zoom out a bit, and, I think when the dust settles, we will look at it and think, look, that Tottenham team are going for top 4. They've got world-class players. I don't think many fans were going into that game yesterday expecting a win. I think, like I say, it's just the manner of the loss. So I think they'll be all right. I think they'll stay up comfortably, but it's just a little reminder that, Eddie Howe is still working with a team that, he's only had a couple of months with, and that, half of them aren't his players. So, yeah, I think a bit of sort of a bit of zooming out and measured, reaction is probably needed.
And Newcastle's still 9 points above the drop zone, so they're still relatively comfortable. But it is important, as Eddie Howe has been doing, just to remind everyone that there's still work to be done, because Burnley have only played 28 games, so they've got 2 games on hand in Newcastle. They win those 2, they'll be just potentially 6 points. They'll be potentially just 3 points behind the Magpies. So obviously there's a few teams below them who aren't in the best of form themselves. Leeds United, Everton, Watford don't look like they're going to get out of it. But Newcastle need to focus on the task in hand and need to you would think another couple of wins just to get them over the line.
Yeah, 100%. And I think after yesterday, especially, Howe will be drilling into the players that, look, it isn't done yet. And, anybody thinking that they could just take the foot off the pedal, it won't be sort of allowed. Like I say, I think they will be okay. The fixtures that they've got coming up, I think if you look at it, Liverpool and Man City aside, that they've got a favourable run in. Wolves is winnable. They've got Palace, they've got Norwich, which, even though it's an away game, you'd hope that they'd win. So, look, I think we'll be all right. I think we just need to get over the line as soon as possible. And then it's just looking towards the summer. But I think if you look at the teams down the bottom in their form, you can't see Norwich catching them. You can't see Watford catching them. Burnley and Everton, are in desperate need of a revival. So it's just making sure they get over the line as soon as possible.
Yeah, fingers crossed that happens as soon as possible. Just a little note to remind you guys that we're holding a live event on Thursday at the Tyneside Irish Centre. I'll pop the link for you to buy tickets into the comments. You can see it hopefully right now if you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, and I'll pop it into the podcast notes as well. If you're listening to the podcast later, please remember to like and subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. Totally free to do, just helps us get the show out to a wider audience. Aaron is part of that panel on Thursday, as is Lee Ryder, Kieran Kelly, and the Daily Mirror's Simon Bird. Proceeds going to the NUFC Fans Food Bank, and a chance for you guys to win a signed Newcastle United shirt by the current squad. So that's up for raffle. And again, the proceeds there will be going to the food bank, which are very grateful of your donations. Let's talk about Alan St. Max when he has been the talking point of late. Aaron, again, he was guilty of giving the ball away at times yesterday. It just didn't click for him. But good to see him back into the squad. And I guess when Newcastle did look a threat, it was probably down to him. And there was times when Spurs really couldn't handle him. He was fouled quite a lot in that first half. So again, we probably saw the good and the bad of Alan St. Maximin. And it goes back to what most people have been saying. You've just got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, I was glad to see him back from the start. He's missed the last couple of games, and I think he's wanted himself to prove a point that he's, still the man that they can rely on. I just think yesterday's game didn't really suit him. I thought first half when the game was tight and Newcastle had a bit of the ball, like say, he was the bright spark. him and Joe Willock were probably the men that were going to, create anything. But I think once the game goes to 3-1 and 4-1 and Newcastle are just chasing shadows and the formation's getting switched about, I don't think he's the man I don't think it suits his game. And I think at one point yesterday he was up front on his own, and that again doesn't suit him. So yeah, it was probably a poor game from him, but I think it was a poor game from everyone. And I think Wolves on Friday is when he really needs to sort of turn up and show that he's back, and he's sort of, he can put the doubters to rest. So I think it was just one of those days where he didn't have much of the ball second half and he couldn't really impact the game as he usually does. But great to see him back. Hopefully, he can sort of find that form that he had in the middle part of the season, because when he's obviously firing, he's one of the first names on the team sheet. But it's just, as we talked on last week, it's just that sort of inconsistency that lets his game down.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you felt, and Antonio Conte pointed this out as well, that the Newcastle's plan was to frustrate Spurs and then hit them on the counter attack. So you need Aaron Maximum to be that outlet. He will get the ball and he'll burst forward and he'll take the team forward. But at the same time, to have that to work, you kind of need the player in his position to be helping out the defender behind him. And there was several times when the space over by Matt Target was alarming, and you could see Spurs at times were just targeting him because the new Alan St. Maximin wasn't getting back quick enough. And it's a really difficult one, and it's one of those decisions and approaches by Eddie Howe, which this is exactly why he gets paid the big money, because I'm sitting there watching it and getting a little bit frustrated, and Eddie Howe's got to try and balance, I guess, the lack of defensive output with what he could potentially do Alan St. Maximin going forward. But by goodness me, it's not an easy one and not an easy decision to make, an easy approach to make work, is it?
Not at all, because Alan St. Maximin's so good going forward, and he's a proper bright spark, and he can lift the game and he can change game on his own. But like you say, when you need someone to do that sort of defensive graft, he's sort of left wanting. Miggy came back in for the two games with Chelsea and Everton, and that probably was because he can offer that bit more defensively. He'll do the run and he'll do the hard graft. Yes, he doesn't have the end product that St. Maximin has, but he adds more balance to the team. And I think that's always going to be the debate with St. Maximin is, does he just sort of leave other positions a bit vulnerable? Does he sort of make the team a bit weaker as a whole? Yes, look, as I've said, he can change games when he's got the ball at his feet, but when he doesn't, you're sort of wondering whether, he's a player that Howe sort of is thinking. He just sort of makes the team a bit imbalanced. So it's going to be that age-old debate. As we touched on last week, he's always going to defy opinion. He's always going to, it's always going to be one of those questions of, should we cash in? Should we keep him, build a team around him? But yeah, yesterday just wasn't his game, and he's really got to show against Wolves that he can deliver, because fans are just starting to question a bit as to whether he's the sort of the man I thought he was.
Roger here asks you, Aaron, you say that the game didn't suit Alan St. Maximin, so he asks you, what games do you think does, and how would Eddie Howe know that? Well, I assume Eddie Howe would know that because he'd be working on the training ground. But in your opinion, what games does suit Alan St. Maximin?
I think the games against lesser teams where Newcastle are going to have a lot of the ball and they can just sort of give it to him and hope that he can sort of attack defences. But I think when games like that, when you're chasing the game and you're not going to have much of the ball, that is what he offers. He only offers stuff when he's got the ball at his feet. So if Newcastle are going to spend the time, with 30% possession and, camped in their own half, I just feel like it doesn't suit him. Yes, he's brilliant on the counter, and yes, you can ping balls to him, but yesterday, whenever he was sort of getting in good positions, Chris Wood wasn't offering anything because he sort of couldn't. Joe Willock was a bit, but only really from the first half. So I think the games where we see St. Maximin at his best are the games at St. James's Park, when you've got the likes of Wolves or Everton and he's got a lot of the ball and he can sort of dazzle the crowd and feed off that. But I don't think away against the big six clubs, I don't think you get the best out of him.
Yeah, and like you say, he wasn't the only person that didn't turn up yesterday. It's very hard to actually pick anyone that did. I mean, I thought Bruno came off the bench and added something. A colleague here in the Chronicle Live Towers told me he thought exactly the opposite. So that shows you it's a proper game of opinion, isn't it? I just want to talk briefly about John Joe Shelvey, because he's been superb since Eddie Howe was come in. But I thought yesterday was another one of those where we saw the John Joe Shelvey of old. There was a few Hollywood passes which It's like he tried one, it didn't come off, and then 2 minutes later he tried another, and it didn't come off. And they're superb when they come off, but it wasn't the game when Newcastle United needed that. They needed just small, quick, intricate passes. And it was a bit frustrating to see him. I get, it was a frustrating day for all. At that point, Newcastle were not in the game really. But it's one of those, isn't it, where you just think, even though you are looking like you're going to lose the game, do you really need to be bombing 40-yard passes, and that it's not going to come off? And I did just feel he slipped into the Jonjo Shelvey of old.
Yeah, it was a shame to see because, like you say, the last couple of months he's been much improved. I remember the first game after the takeover was Spurs when he, came off the bench and lunged into that tackle and got sent off. And I remember saying, he hasn't really got a future here, but he has been very, very good. Again, yesterday, was it a game that didn't suit him? I think just like St. Maximin, I think Shelvey's at his best when he can sort of spray those Hollywood passes and he sort of feeds off that confidence of when one or two of them go right. He sort of, he has one of those games where you look at him and think, why can't you play it like that every week? So, yeah, it was a difficult one. I think, Newcastle and Shelvey wasn't the only one. They weren't even getting the 5-yard passes right. Never mind the sort of 40-yard balls over the top. So it doesn't also help when he's getting shifted, into centre back and back into midfield and stuff. So it was a shame, but I don't think you can fault Shelvey because, he's had his critics and the last sort of 3 months, he's been a big part of why Newcastle have been playing so well.
And I guess, the reason why we are sitting here and maybe just asking questions about Dan Burn, about Alan St. Maximin, about Jonjo Shelvey, it goes back to what you and I and what I've written a few weeks ago, is that Eddie Howe has set the bar so high and these players have kind of matched his expectation and they've shown us what they can do. So when they do put in a performance like this where, individually and collectively, they're not as good as they have been recently, even as, as good as well as performing the Chelsea game, and they lost that game, it does maybe come to light a bit more than it would have done maybe under Steve Bruce or when Eddie Howe first started, because, the bar hadn't been set very high. We weren't expecting too much of them, but now they've shown us what they can do. When they do perform badly, they may get criticised a little bit more.
Yeah, 100%. I think it goes with the territory when you have so many wins and you have, they had a 3-month period of, going unbeaten really. So when all of a sudden that comes crashing down and, it's 3 defeats on the bounce, of course players are going to be getting questioned. You're going to be looking at them thinking, are they really as good as they have been the last couple of months? And I think it's just one of those where, they are humans and you've got to remember this is the same team pretty much, apart from 4 or 5 players, that Steve Bruce had and that were really struggling at the start of the season. So I think, like you say, they've had 3 months of playing well and they've been, in really good form. 3 defeats on the bounce. It's just natural that fans and sort of us in the media are going to start saying, well, this player isn't playing well, blah, blah, blah. And I think now it's just about putting it right. Big chance to do that Friday. And I think you just got to hope that the players are up for it.
Yeah, 100%. And we've got there Tom Ansell saying, let's just get back home, see how we go. We've been great we've been on a great run that had to end at some point. I guess that is the kind of realistic approach you need to take with these results. And we'll finish here on a comment from Antonio Chappers on Facebook. And I think actually this is also another element to the reaction to yesterday's game against Spurs. And he says, it'll take us at least 3 years to get to Spurs' level. And you've kind of alluded to it as well, Aaron. They're a good side. They've just started to find form at the right time. Their 2 best players, in Son and Harry Kane, a few months ago, they weren't gelling as well as they have been in previous seasons. Now they are doing just that. And it was always going to be a tough task. And Newcastle, really, the team that played, if you look at the players that were there, they only had Dan Burn, Matt Targett, and Chris Woodin. So, there's not been huge in terms of players coming in. And it's not like that Kieran Trippier in as well, and they've signed loads of players. So it is a work in progress. And I guess, when you compare where Spurs are, the team Spurs have got, what they're aiming for, it was always going to be difficult, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. We've gone to the capital, having lost 2 games in a row. Spurs have found their feet. And look, at the end of the day, we're playing a team that are, managed by a Premier League winner and a Serie A winner. So there is just levels to it. And I think, I did touch on it earlier before, all of a sudden, once Newcastle are playing well and we're, climbing up the table and we're away from the drop seemingly. Attention always already, naturally turns to next season and we need to be challenging for the top 10 and we could maybe creep in at the top 6 next season. I think that comment is right. I think will be years until we're really matching the likes of Tottenham and Arsenal and Liverpool. It's a work in progress. And I think games like yesterday, as Eddie Howe touched on, by the way, I think when we look at this game in a couple of months' time, it will probably be a positive because it's just a reminder that Newcastle United are still a mid-table team with a mid-table squad at the moment. So I think games like that are sometimes just needed just to keep the feet on the floor, really.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed they can get back to winning ways this Friday against Wolves. We will have the preview podcast later this week. That'll go up on Wednesday. We'll also hopefully have an opposition view as well. And again, our live event on Thursday kicks off at 7:30 at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Do head over to the website to buy tickets. It's going to be a great night to talk about Newcastle United. And Aaron's excited to meet some of our listeners, some of our readers in person as well, aren't you, Aaron? I know you're looking forward to the event.
Yeah, 100%. It's my first live event with the team. So yeah, it'll be good. Obviously chat all things Newcastle with some like-minded fans. So yeah, and if anyone, of course, wants to buy us a pint in the Irish Centre, they're more than welcome. So yeah, come along, definitely.
They do a wonderful pint of Guinness, as I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners know. So I'll pop that link to get tickets into the comments. Do head over. And like I say, that £5 goes towards the NUC Fans Food Bank. And that will help feed a family of, I think it's 3 for a week. So it really does help the most vulnerable in our community. And again, just please remember to like and follow the podcast through your podcast provider. And finally, head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, where we will keep you up to date with all the latest Newcastle United news, including all the fallout to yesterday's result at Spurs and all the build-up looking ahead to Friday's game with Wolves.